Now remember our second question. How do we know that when the anointed are taken to heaven, the great crowd won't drift away into trouble? How do we know that they won't rebel the way Jehoash did when Jehoiada died? Or drift off into apostasy the way the second century Christians did after the last of the apostles died off? John. Well, we know. It's just a matter of turning the page. And the answer is, because we do not live in ancient Israel, and we do not live in the second century CE. We live in a wonderful time of what? Restoration. When Jehovah has guaranteed us that no weapon formed against us will succeed.
This was an awkward part in Sam Hurd's talk. He's here joking effectively about how tied to his notes he is.
It's just a matter of turning the page. And the answer is,
he's obviously guessing laughs because he's Samuel Hurd. He's a governing body member giving a talk at the annual meeting in front of a doting audience. They all consider him to be charming and witty and doing his best as an older brother. But if this is really serious information, if this is important information related to New Light in some way that Jehovah's Witnesses really need to hear, and he's making the argument that this is something that the other sheep, non-anointed Jehovah's Witnesses, are concerned about. He's saying that Jehovah's Witnesses are being kept up at night by the thought of the governing body one day no longer being around because they've been raptured. So this is apparently a serious topic that he's talking about, but he's tied to his notes. He's dependent on the words in front of him in order to convey the truth on this matter. My question would be, if it's so important, why don't you know what to say without your notes? Why aren't you able to ad-lib a little bit, to speak extemporaneously, to just say what the answer is while you're turning the page, rather than literally having the words in front of you, which seems to be the case here? Maybe I'm reading too much into this. A lot of you will be saying, Lloyd, you're picking on someone in his 80s. Of course, he's going to struggle in these situations. Maybe I'll struggle when I'm that age, when I'm talking about something I know inside out and feel passionate about. I just struggle to visualize being that disconnected from the material or being so dependent on notes that I'm not able to verbalize something that's important and something that I know well and care about.
now our third question. What will happen when the anointed are taken to heaven? Well, try to imagine that time. Give you a second. It's over. The Great Tribulation is underway. Babylon the Great, the world empire, false religion is destroyed first. Think of it. Events that God's organization has prepared us for over many decades are happening before our eyes. Then comes something else we have been told to expect. What's that? Sometime during the Great Tribulation and before the war of Armageddon, the remaining ones of Christ's anointed are taken to heaven. What do you think will happen next? Will the great crowd wander about, lost and confused, like sheep without a shepherd? Of course not. Remember, Jesus is the shepherd. he will never fail to do his job. Keep in mind that the anointed are not the head of our organization. Jesus is. And we hope all parents today raising children will teach them that fact. We get so many little letters from beautiful little children. Why? Well, parents tell them that we're something, a governing body. You ought to write the governing body, honey. And they do. They draw pictures of us good night alive. But they mean well. We know that. Parents mean well. We're not putting them down. But they need to know the truth. Our leader is one, the Christ.
Isn't it convenient when the leader of a cult, or one of a number of leaders of a cult, get to disavow their leadership when it suits them? We're not in charge of this organization. Jesus is in charge of it.
Remember, Jesus is the shepherd. He will never fail to do his job. Keep in mind that the anointed are not the head of our organization. Jesus is.
They may look like leaders. They may speak like leaders. They may act like leaders. They may seek to control their followers in even the most intimate areas of their lives. They may have 8.5 million followers around the world, hanging off their every word, seeing them as the channel with God Almighty. But when it suits them, well, we're not really the leaders. Jesus is the leader. This, for me, is just a blatant shirking of responsibility. It's having it both ways. Samuel Hurd is a cult leader, as is the rest of the governing body. They all seek control over people's lives and wield control over people's lives. And then they act all surprised when children write in and draw pictures of them.
We get so many little letters from beautiful little children. Why? Well, parents tell them that we're something, a governing body. You ought to write the governing body, honey. And they do. They draw pictures of us good night alive. But they mean well. We know that. Parents mean well. We're not putting them down.
It sure sounded like you were putting them down, Samuel Hurd. It sure sounded like you were being sneering and sarcastic and all perplexed and bewildered that children would want to draw you. Is it just me, or is this even an irritation to Samuel Hurd? He's irritated, apparently, that children are drawing him and the rest of the governing body members, so that parents deserve a mild slap on the wrist for letting their children do this. Am I going crazy? Is this not exactly what he should be expecting, given the fact that he and his colleagues are thrusting themselves in front of millions of Jehovah's Witnesses, I don't know, on a weekly or monthly basis? It depends whether we're talking morning worship videos, JW broadcasting episodes, convention programs, annual meetings. We can't get away from them. If you're following Jehovah's Witnesses, you're seeing these men all the time. They make themselves prominent. They insist on a role of prominence within people's lives to the extent where they get to control almost everything a person says, does, or even thinks. And then they act all surprised when people give them the reverence that they crave, when children draw their pictures. Samuel Hurd, I've got some advice for you, fella. If you don't want kids drawing you, if you don't want to be viewed as a leader by 8.5 million followers, if you don't want them viewing you as being in charge of the organization, don't be in charge of the organization. Don't insert yourself in people's lives to the extent where families are literally broken apart if anyone disagrees with you. I'm sorry, this is exactly the level of devotion, the level of adulation you should expect when you're putting yourself out there as a cult leader.